At our friend's wedding, my wife slapped me across the face and said, "Know your place." Everyone decided I had ruined the celebration with my jealousy. 2 days later, the groom sent me the wedding photos, and I realized my wife had needed that slap for one reason only. But to understand what really happened that night, I have to go back several months. Back to when my wife first started telling me about her new coworker. His name was Dylan, and according to Emily, he had a serious problem with the word no. "Dylan texted me again," she said one evening. I was standing in the kitchen, attempting to cook something that looked vaguely like dinner. Emily walked in, dropped her purse onto the counter, and sighed as if she had just completed a 12-hour shift in a coal mine instead of spending the day in an air-conditioned office. "What did he want this time?" I asked. "He asked if I wanted to get a drink after work." "And what did you say?" "What do you think I said?" "I don't know. Maybe you accepted, married him during happy hour, and came home to collect your winter clothes." She gave me a tired look. I said no. "Good choice." She tried not to smile. That was how these conversations usually went. Emily complained, "I made a stupid joke." She rolled her eyes. Then we moved on with our evening. At first, Dylan was nothing more than a mildly annoying character in the daily television show Emily called her job. Every office has one. The guy who mistakes basic politeness for romantic interest. You hold the elevator for him once, and suddenly he starts imagining your children. You say, "Have a nice weekend," and he hears, "Please follow me home." The following week, Emily mentioned him again. He offered to drive me home. "And you said no?" "Obviously." A few days later, Dylan apparently brought her coffee. The week after that, he invited her to lunch, then dinner, then some office happy hour she had no interest in attending. Almost every week there was another story. Dylan wrote to me again. Dylan offered to help me with a project. Dylan asked if I wanted to go hiking. Dylan waited for me near the elevators. Always Dylan. Always another invitation. Always the same conclusion. He just doesn't know how to accept rejection. At first, I laughed about it. Then I started getting irritated. From the way Emily described Dylan, he had about as much chance with her as I had of becoming a professional ballet dancer. Still, there was something unpleasant about knowing that another man kept circling my wife. One evening, Emily sat beside me on the couch and held out her phone. "Look at this." I took it from her. There was a message from Dylan. "Maybe you'll change your mind someday." There was a smiling face at the end. Men like Dylan apparently believed a smiling face could transform an unwanted invitation into irresistible charm. I read it again. Then I handed the phone back. "Do you want me to talk to him?" Emily's reaction was immediate. No. A sharp, automatic no. The kind of no normally used when someone suggests cutting the red wire without checking the instruction manual. I frowned. "He keeps bothering you." "I can handle it." "I know you can. That doesn't mean you should have to." She placed her phone face down on the coffee table. "There's nothing to handle. He's just an idiot. An idiot who keeps asking out a married woman. He hasn't done anything dangerous." I didn't say he was dangerous. "You want to confront him?" I said talk to him. Emily gave me a long look. "You're not going to talk to him," she said. "I'm 35 years old, Emily. I think I can have a conversation without challenging him to a duel in the parking lot." "That's not the point." "Then what is the point?" "He works with me. I have to see him every day." So? "So if you interfere, everything will become uncomfortable." "It already sounds uncomfortable." "For me," she said. "Not for you." That shut me up. Not because I agreed completely. Because she was right about one thing. It was happening at her workplace. She was the one who would have to deal with the consequences if I marched in there playing the protective husband. And honestly, I had no intention of doing that. I wasn't planning to storm into her office, flip over Dylan's desk, and announce that my family's honor demanded satisfaction. I only wanted him to understand that Emily's repeated refusals were not part of some elaborate courtship ritual. But she didn't want my help, so I backed off. All right, I said. I won't talk to him. Promise? I raised a hand. I solemnly swear not to assault Romeo with office equipment. I'm serious. So am I. Staplers can be dangerous. She finally smiled. Then she leaned over and kissed my cheek. He's harmless, she said. He just doesn't know how to accept no. That sentence became her favorite explanation. Whenever Dylan appeared in another story, she repeated it. He was annoying. He was persistent. He was socially clueless. He was harmless. And because Emily told me about him herself, I trusted her. That was the brilliant part. She never acted as though Dylan was a secret. She made him the exact opposite. She brought him into our home through complaints, jokes, and carefully selected messages. She gave me just enough information to make me believe I knew everything. Sometimes she would even show me his name on her screen. Again? I would ask. Again. What does Casanova want now? To know whether I'm going to the company dinner. Are you? I haven't decided. Will he be there? Probably. Then take pepper spray. She laughed. You're ridiculous. And yet you married me voluntarily. One of my poorer decisions. Top 3? Definitely. There were no tense silences, no obvious lies, no nervous attempts to hide the phone. At least, none that I noticed at the time. Emily had always been good at appearing open. She understood something I didn't. The easiest way to hide a suspicious name was not to remove it from the conversation. It was to mention it so often that it stopped sounding suspicious. Dylan became a joke between us. Whenever Emily's phone buzzed, I occasionally asked, "Is that your boyfriend?" She would throw a pillow at me. Once, she replied, "Yes, we're running away together on Tuesday." "Tuesday doesn't work for me. I have a dentist appointment." "I'll ask him to reschedule our escape." "That's very considerate." We laughed. I genuinely thought it was funny. There is something deeply humiliating about remembering the jokes you made while someone was lying to you. It's like discovering you helped decorate the stage for your own public execution. At the time, though, I saw no reason to question her. Emily and I had been married for 7 years. We weren't newlyweds living inside a permanent perfume commercial. We had bills, schedules, arguments about whose turn it was to buy detergent. Our marriage was ordinary. And I mean that as a compliment. Ordinary felt safe. We knew each other's habits. She knew I couldn't sleep if the bedroom door was open. I knew she would claim she didn't want dessert and then eat half of mine. She knew I hated being late. I knew her definition of 5 minutes had no connection to any recognized measurement of time. We weren't perfect, but I believed we were solid. So when she said Dylan was only a coworker who couldn't take a hint, I believed her. When she said she didn't want me involved, I respected it. When she showed me selected messages, I mistook them for honesty. I even started worrying about her. "Has he backed off?" I asked one night. "A little." "That means no." "It means he hasn't written to me in 2 days. Maybe he discovered dignity." "Let's not expect miracles." "What happens if he keeps going?" "I'll deal with it." "How?" "I don't know. Maybe I'll speak to my manager." "You should." I said maybe. Emily disliked conflict. At least, that was what I believed. She hated uncomfortable conversations. She avoided arguments whenever possible. She once spent 3 months going to a hairdresser she disliked because she felt guilty about changing salons, so I could understand why she didn't want to report a colleague unless absolutely necessary. Then the moment came when our friends invited us to a wedding. A few weeks before Jake and Sarah's wedding, Emily came home later than usual. She said she had been finishing a project. There was nothing unusual about that. Her department had been busy, and she had stayed late several times that month. Still, when she walked into the bedroom, she seemed distracted. She placed her phone on the dresser with the screen facing down. That detail meant nothing to me then. Now it shines in my memory like a warning sign covered in flashing lights. "How was work?" I asked. "Exhausting." "Dylan behaving himself?" She paused while removing her earrings. Then she laughed. Why are you asking about him? You usually provide weekly updates. I was worried the show had been canceled. He's fine. Fine? He's leaving me alone. That's good. She changed the subject immediately. Again, I didn't question it. I had spent months being told Dylan was a problem. Hearing that the problem had apparently solved itself felt like good news. I didn't know that during those same weeks, Emily had begun helping Sarah with the final wedding arrangements. Sarah was her best friend. Jake was mine. The four of us had known one another for years. Their wedding was supposed to be one of those rare social events where nobody needed to worry about awkward introductions or making conversation with strangers. Our friends would be there. Their families would be there. People we trusted. A safe, happy evening. At least, that was what I expected. What I didn't know was that Emily had already made sure there would be one additional guest. A man who was not Jake's friend. Not Sarah's relative. A man my wife had spent months describing as an unwanted nuisance. And by the time I saw Dylan at that wedding, Emily had already trained me to believe the most important lie. That she didn't want him anywhere near her. The wedding was on a Saturday. Jake and Sarah had spent nearly a year planning every little detail. Emily had helped with almost everything, so she was just as excited as the bride. That morning, while I struggled with my tie, Emily fixed it with a smile. You'd be helpless without me. I choose to believe that's romantic. It's optimistic. She kissed me before we left. Nothing about her seemed unusual. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't distracted. She looked exactly like the woman I'd trusted for 7 years. The venue was already full when we arrived. Friends, family, co-workers, people laughing, taking pictures, hugging each other. Emily immediately went to help Sarah with the final preparations, while I found Jake. You look like you're about to faint, I told him. I'm fine. You've said I'm fine 3 times in 30 seconds. I'll survive. You'd better. The deposits are non-refundable. He laughed. The ceremony went perfectly. Jake somehow remembered his vows. Sarah cried. Half the guests cried with her. Even I got a little emotional. The reception started right afterward. People grabbed drinks, music got louder, conversations filled the ballroom. I was looking around for Emily when I noticed a man standing near the bar. He looked strangely familiar. For a second I couldn't place him. Then it hit me. Dylan, Emily's co-worker. The same guy she'd spent months complaining about. I frowned. Maybe Jake knew him, or Sarah did. Maybe he was somebody's cousin. It wasn't my business. At least, that's what I told myself. I grabbed 2 glasses of champagne and started looking for my wife. Emily was standing with the bridesmaids near the dance floor. She was laughing at something Sarah had said. I walked over and handed her a glass. Thanks. I leaned closer. Guess who I just saw? She looked at me. Who? Dylan. For the briefest moment, her smile froze. So quickly that I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Then she laughed. Seriously? Yeah. She glanced across the room. I didn't know he was coming. I guess someone invited him. I guess so. Her answer sounded perfectly reasonable. There were more than 100 guests. Not everyone knew everyone else. Still, something felt off. Not because Dylan was there, because Emily didn't seem annoyed. For months, she'd described him as the co-worker who couldn't take a hint, the man who texted too much, the guy who wouldn't leave her alone. Yet now, seeing him at our friend's wedding, she didn't look uncomfortable. She looked careful. Sarah called her over before I could think any more about it. Emily squeezed my hand. I'll be back. I watched her disappear into the crowd. A few minutes later, I looked toward the bar again. Dylan was gone. I assumed he'd wandered off to talk to someone. The evening moved on. Dinner was served. People toasted the bride and groom. Jake's father embarrassed him with childhood stories. Sarah's sister cried halfway through her speech. Everything felt exactly like a wedding should. Then, while people were moving between the tables, I saw Dylan again. This time he wasn't alone. He was talking to Emily. They stood only a few feet apart. Nothing inappropriate. No touching, no flirting. Just talking. When Emily noticed me looking, she smiled and waved. Then she turned back to finish the conversation. I told myself not to be ridiculous. She worked with the man. Ignoring him in the middle of a wedding would have looked childish. Still, it bothered me more than I wanted to admit. A few minutes later, Dylan walked away. Emily returned to our table as if nothing had happened. "What did he want?" I asked casually. "He just said hello." "That's it?" "That's it." "You two looked busy." He congratulated Jake and Sarah. Then he asked how work was going. And I said work is work. She took another sip of champagne. The conversation ended there, or at least, I let it end there. For the next hour, I kept noticing Dylan, not because I was looking for him, because he kept appearing wherever Emily was. Every time Emily moved, sooner or later, Dylan seemed to end up nearby. She walked over to congratulate Jake's parents. A few minutes later, Dylan was standing in the same group, laughing at something Jake's father had said. Emily joined Sarah's college friends. Before long, Dylan wandered over and somehow became part of that conversation too. When everyone lined up at the buffet, he ended up only a couple of people behind her. Later, Emily went to grab another drink. By the time she reached the bar, Dylan was already there. None of those moments meant anything by themselves. He never hugged her. He never touched her. He wasn't openly flirting. I kept reminding myself of everything Emily had told me over the past few months. He's annoying. He won't take no for an answer. He's socially clueless. Maybe this was exactly what she'd been talking about. Maybe he really was following her around. But then I started paying closer attention to Emily. That was when something didn't add up. She wasn't trying to avoid him. If Dylan really made her uncomfortable, where were the excuses? Where were the polite smiles followed by, "Excuse me, I need to find my husband"? Where was the body language that said, "Please leave me alone"? Instead, she seemed relaxed. She smiled. She listened. Sometimes she'd say something, and he'd laugh. Too comfortable for someone she'd spent months describing as a nuisance. I tried to shake the feeling off. Maybe she didn't want to make a scene at a wedding. Maybe she was just being polite. Emily had always hated awkward confrontations. That explanation made sense. At least it did for a while. Then Jake walked past my table carrying 2 beers. "You've been staring across the room for 5 minutes, he said. "Have I?" "Either you're planning a robbery or something's bothering you." I hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." I nodded toward Dylan. "Who's that guy?" Jake looked over. "The tall one?" "Yeah." "Oh." His forehead wrinkled. "I actually don't know him." I blinked. "You don't?" Jake laughed. "I thought he was one of Sarah's guests." "You never met him before today?" "No." That answer surprised me more than it probably should have. Jake wasn't just another guest. He was the groom. If he didn't know Dylan, then Dylan had to be connected to Sarah somehow. Or maybe one of the bridesmaids. Emily was one of the bridesmaids. I immediately hated where my thoughts were trying to go. "Don't be stupid. He's her coworker. She told you everything. She even showed you his messages. You promised yourself you weren't going to become the jealous husband who imagined problems where there weren't any." I took a slow breath. Maybe I'd let months of hearing Dylan's name get into my head. Maybe now I simply noticed him because I recognized him. Nothing more. I decided to stop overthinking it. I picked up 2 glasses of champagne from a passing waiter. One for me, one for Emily. She was standing alone near one of the large windows at the far end of the ballroom, watching people dance. Finally, a quiet moment together. I smiled and started walking toward my wife. I had no idea that less than a minute later, everyone at the wedding would stop looking at the dance floor and start looking at us. Emily was standing alone near one of the tall windows overlooking the garden. Soft lights from outside reflected in the glass behind her. She held a champagne flute in one hand and watched the dance floor with a small smile. For the first time all evening, she wasn't surrounded by bridesmaids or guests, just us. "There you are," I said, handing her one. "I was wondering where you disappeared to." "I've been looking for my wife." "You found her." "So far." She smiled and clinked her glass against mine. "For a second," she said, "I thought you were actually enjoying yourself." I was. "Were?" "I made the mistake of sitting through Jake's uncle explaining cryptocurrency." She laughed. "How bad was it?" "I'm pretty sure he tried to convince me to invest in something called Dog Emperor Coin." "Ouch. I may never financially recover." She shook her head, smiling. For a moment, everything felt normal again. The music, people dancing, the laughter around us. I almost forgot about Dylan. "So?" I said casually. "I ran into your biggest fan earlier." She looked at me. "My biggest fan?" "Dylan." Her fingers tightened ever so slightly around the stem of her glass. It lasted less than a second. If I had blinked, I probably would have missed it. "Oh," she said. "Yeah. I didn't know he was invited." "So you weren't expecting him either?" "No." Her answer came quickly. Too quickly. "He said hello earlier," she continued. "That's all." I nodded. "I noticed." She looked at me for a second. "What does that mean?" "I just noticed you two talked a couple of times. We worked together. It would have been rude to ignore him." "I didn't say you should." She studied my face. "Are you upset?" "No." "You look upset." "I'm just surprised." "About what?" "That he ended up here." She let out a quiet laugh. "It's a wedding, not a secret government meeting." "I know. There are over 100 guests. He probably knows someone." "Probably." Neither of us spoke for a few seconds. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was unfamiliar. Emily was usually the first one to fill quiet moments. Now she simply stared into her champagne. Finally, she looked back at me. "You're not getting jealous, are you?" The question caught me off guard. I actually laughed. "Jealous? You've mentioned Dylan a few times tonight." "I've mentioned him because he's here." "And?" "And for months I've heard stories about how he won't leave you alone." She shrugged. "He still won't." I looked around the ballroom. "You don't exactly seem bothered." Emily's smile faded. "I've spent months telling you this guy makes me uncomfortable, and now you're criticizing me for being polite to him at our friend's wedding?" "I'm not criticizing you." "It sounds like you are." I sighed. "Emily, I'm not trying to start an argument." "Good, because I'm not arguing." She looked away. "I don't want tonight ruined over something this stupid." "I don't either." Another silence. Then Sarah called Emily's name from across the ballroom. "There you are," Sarah shouted. "We need you for pictures." Emily looked relieved. "I have to go." She leaned forward, kissed my cheek, and smiled. "We'll talk later." "Sure." She hurried toward the photographer. I stayed by the window, finishing my champagne. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was making something out of nothing. Maybe seeing Dylan unexpectedly had simply thrown me off balance. I watched the photographer gather the bridal party. Jake, Sarah, the bridesmaids, the groomsmen. Family members rotated in and out while everyone laughed and posed. I started walking toward the group. Halfway across the ballroom, I noticed Dylan again. He wasn't standing with the guests anymore. He was only a few feet away from the photographer, close enough that every time Emily stepped away from the group between pictures, he somehow ended up near her. That was the moment something inside me finally stopped feeling like coincidence. I decided I'd walk over, put my arm around my wife, and remind everyone, including Dylan, that she wasn't standing there alone. I never imagined that one simple gesture was about to change my life. I waited until the photographer finished another round of pictures. Parents stepped out, friends stepped in. Someone shouted for one more. The usual wedding chaos. Emily was standing near the edge of the group while everyone rearranged themselves again. She wasn't posing anymore. She was simply waiting. Dylan stood a few feet away, talking to one of the groomsmen, or at least pretending to. His eyes kept drifting toward Emily. I looked at them. I took her glass and approached her. I wasn't planning to accuse anyone of anything. Honestly, I just wanted to stand beside my wife. That's it. As I got closer, Emily noticed me. She smiled. At least I thought she did. Then I reached her. "Your champagne," I said. She took the glass. "Thanks." I smiled. "You've been kidnapped by photographers. They're worse than paparazzi." I was starting to think I'd have to schedule an appointment just to talk to my own wife. She gave a small laugh. For a second, everything felt normal again. Then I casually slipped my arm around her waist, the way I'd done thousands of times before, the way any husband would. Emily stiffened. It was subtle, but I felt it immediately. She wasn't relaxing into the hug. She was pulling away. I frowned. "You okay?" "Yes." Then I looked at Dylan, who was, of course, standing nearby. "So you're Dylan." He looked at me. The guy who can't seem to take no for an answer. I smiled politely. "Here's a piece of friendly advice. It's time you stopped hovering around my wife. Why don't you do us both a favor and spend the rest of the evening somewhere far away from her?" Emily spun around so fast that I didn't even understand what was happening. The slap cracked across the ballroom. It was loud enough that the music suddenly didn't seem loud anymore. My head snapped to one side. The room went completely silent. Every conversation stopped. Dozens of people turned to look at us. Emily's face was pale. Her eyes weren't frightened. They were furious. She looked straight at me and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Know your place." For a second, I honestly thought I'd misunderstood her. My cheek burned. The ballroom was completely silent. No one moved. No one spoke. Every pair of eyes was on me. I slowly turned my head back toward Emily. My cheek was burning. I could still feel the sting where her hand had landed. I searched her face, expecting something. Regret, panic, an apology, anything. Instead, she looked at me with a coldness I'd never seen before. "Emily," I said quietly. "What the hell was that?" She didn't lower her voice. "If you ever embarrass me like that again," she said, "we're going to have a very different conversation at home." Embarrass her? For a second, I genuinely wondered if I'd missed part of the evening. Had I insulted someone? Had I said something offensive? All I'd done was ask a man who had spent months bothering my wife to keep his distance. I looked at Dylan. He hadn't said a word. He simply stood there watching us. There was no embarrassment on his face. No surprise. If anything, he looked strangely satisfied. Jake was the first to reach us. "Guys," he looked from me to Emily. "What happened?" Emily answered before I could open my mouth. "He walked over here and started harassing one of my co-workers." Jake frowned. "What?" Dylan was standing here minding his own business, and Mark decided to make a scene. I stared at her. "That's not what happened." She looked straight at Jake. "He's been acting jealous all evening." I actually laughed, because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I've been jealous?" I said. "You just publicly humiliated me." "I humiliated you?" she shot back. "You marched over here trying to act like some possessive husband. I asked him to stay away from you." "No," she said sharply. "You tried to tell another adult where he was allowed to stand, and I asked you not to interfere." A few guests had gathered nearby. No one asked what really happened. They had all heard the slap. They had all heard Emily shouting. As far as they knew, I was simply another jealous husband causing drama at someone else's wedding. Sarah hurried over next. "Oh my God!" She looked horrified. "Is everything okay?" Emily took a deep breath. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I didn't want this to happen today." That sentence hit me harder than the slap. She sounded like she was the victim. Sarah looked at me. "Mark, what happened?" I opened my mouth. Then I looked around the room. Dozens of people were watching. some already whispering, others pretending not to stare. I suddenly understood something. It didn't matter what I said now. Emily accused me in front of everyone, and every person in that ballroom had witnessed only the last 10 seconds, not the months leading up to them. Just me confronting a coworker, and my wife reacting as though I'd crossed a line. I looked back at Emily. She avoided my eyes. For the first time all evening, she looked relieved, as if something had gone exactly the way she'd wanted. I took a slow breath. Then I nodded. "I'm sorry, Jake," I said quietly. "I'm not going to ruin your wedding." Without another word, I turned around. No one tried to stop me. As I walked toward the exit, I could feel every eye in the room following me. Just before I reached the doors, I glanced back one last time. Emily was already standing beside Sarah. People were comforting her. And Dylan. Dylan was still standing exactly where I'd left him, looking straight at me. There wasn't a smile on his face. But there was something worse. The look of a man who believed he'd just won. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I drove straight to my brother's place. I slept on his couch. Or at least I tried to. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same moment. Emily's hand. The silence. Know your place. The next morning, my phone started buzzing. "Emily, what the hell was that yesterday?" A minute later. "You completely ruined Jake and Sarah's wedding. Do you have any idea how embarrassed I was?" I didn't answer. The messages kept coming. "Everyone's talking about us now. You made me look like an idiot. Your jealousy is out of control." I read every message. Then I finally replied, "I need some time to think." That was the only message I sent. Emily answered almost immediately. "Seriously? That's all you have to say?" I locked my phone and put it face down. For the first time in 7 years, I stopped answering my wife. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was Jake. "Hey, you doing okay?" "I've been better." There was a brief silence. "Listen, Sarah and I finally got the wedding photos back. So? I think you should see them." A few seconds later, my phone buzzed. A link. I opened the gallery. The first few photos were exactly what you'd expect. The ceremony, the first dance, the cake. Then I noticed Dylan. He wasn't just in the background. He was everywhere. Standing beside Emily, talking to her, looking at her. Photo after photo. I kept scrolling. One picture made me stop. Emily was laughing. Dylan was leaning toward her, much closer than any coworker had a reason to be. Then another. His hand was resting on the small of her back. Another. She was fixing his tie. I felt my stomach tighten. Jake spoke again. I didn't notice any of it during the wedding, but the photographer captured everything. I kept scrolling. Each photo answered a question and created 2 more. Then I reached the last few pictures. They weren't from the ballroom. They were taken outside the venue. The photographer had been taking candid shots of guests. One photo froze me. Emily and Dylan were standing alone behind the building. No guests, no crowd. They were kissing. I stared at the screen. Jake broke the silence. "Mark, there's something else you should know. Dylan wasn't invited." "What?" I checked. I didn't invite him. Sarah didn't invite him either. I felt my grip tighten around the phone. If neither of you invited him, then how was he there? Jake exhaled. I asked Sarah the same thing. And? She remembered. A few weeks before the wedding, Emily asked if she could bring a coworker. I closed my eyes. She said he was going through a rough time, Jake continued, that he didn't know many people and would appreciate getting out for an evening. So Sarah said yes. I didn't say anything. Jake did. I'm sorry, Mark, I had no idea. Neither did I, until that moment. Then everything Emily had told me over the past few months came rushing back. Every complaint, every story about Dylan bothering her, every time she insisted I stay out of it. She hadn't been protecting herself. She'd been protecting him, And she'd been making sure that if I ever confronted him, I'd look like the jealous husband everyone expected me to be. The slap wasn't spontaneous. It was part of the plan. Now it all made sense. I didn't call Emily. I called a divorce lawyer. The consultation lasted less than an hour. He listened to everything. Then he looked at the photos. "You don't need to rush," he said. "But if your marriage is over, don't waste time pretending it isn't." I agreed. That afternoon, I went back to our house while Emily was at work. I packed my clothes, my documents, everything that mattered. I left my wedding ring on the kitchen table, nothing else. An hour later, my phone exploded. "Emily, where are you? Why is your ring here?" I ignored every message. A few minutes later, she called. Again and again. I declined every call. For 2 days, she kept trying. Then a new message appeared. "Can we please talk?" For the first time since the wedding, she wasn't angry anymore. She was worried. It was too late. The only conversation we had left was in a lawyer's office. 3 days later, she caught me outside my office. She stepped out of her car before I could leave. "Mark, please." I kept walking. She hurried after me. "I can explain." I stopped. "Explain what? The slap? Dylan? Or the lies?" She froze. "I never cheated on you." I pulled out my phone. Then I opened the last wedding photo, the one of her kissing Dylan. I handed it to her. The color drained from her face. For several seconds, she couldn't say a word. Finally, she whispered, "I can explain." I took the phone back. "I don't need an explanation anymore. I need a divorce." She reached for my arm. I stepped away. "Mark, please." I looked at her one last time. "You told me to know my place. I finally do. It just isn't beside you." I turned around and walked away. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. I never asked whether Emily and Dylan ended up together. By then, it no longer mattered. Sometimes people ask me what hurt the most. It wasn't the affair. It wasn't even the slap. It was realizing that she'd spent months preparing me to look like the villain, while I was still trying to be a good husband. The day she told me to know my place, I finally did. My place was nowhere in her life. If you felt this story hit hard, drop a like, subscribe for more, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support keeps Steelheart beating.